I ditched my Steam Deck OLED for the new and flashy Nintendo Switch 2 for 1 month to uncover which handheld is the best, and I think I might finally have an answer, but it might not be the one you expect. But which device is right for you? That is the question that I aim to help you answer for yourself in today's video, so stick around till the end. But enough yap, let's begin the comparison. Starting off with ergonomics, the Switch 2 is a flat design with rounded corners. While it is sleek, it is admittedly not the most comfortable to hold for long periods of time, but it isn't super uncomfortable either. And I'd argue it's much more comfortable than its predecessor when it comes to a lot of its features. Its larger size helps with that, along with its improved buttons and joysticks. The Steam Deck, however, is uglier looking than the Switch 2. It's thicker and bigger, but it's designed with ergonomics in mind. The way the console is contoured and bowed backwards to fit the palms of your hands, along with the symmetrical button and joystick placement, really help with comfort. Funnily enough, Nintendo actually regressed when it came to joystick placement from the Wii U to the Switch and Switch 2 because I actually much prefer the symmetrical joystick placement at the top of the device like here on the Steam Deck. It feels much more natural to me. The Switch 2, however, forces my right hand to grip the device lower than I would like to and adjust my thumb into the correct position for the right joystick. But when the Joy-Cons are disconnected from the Switch 2, they become much more comfortable to use, but we can also use a controller with the Steam Deck as well, so this becomes null and void when comparing the two handhelds. However, you can always buy a grip for the Switch 2 to make it more ergonomic, but the Steam Deck OLED wins this round just due to the fact that it's a better shaped device. While it is uglier and less sleek, it's just designed better for comfort. Moving on, let's talk about the specs of each device. Now, when comparing both devices, I will not mention T-flops or anything like that because it's just not comparable when comparing the two very different chips from different brands. But the Switch 2 has a custom NVIDIA T239 processor from the Ampere generation, aka the 30 series GPUs from NVIDIA, and 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. A lot of you are probably sitting there like, what the does any of that mean? And since it's from NVIDIA, the Switch 2 has the ability to use artificial intelligence to upscale from a lower resolution to a higher one with minimal cost of power using DLSS upscaling. The Switch 2, however, only has an option for 256 gigabytes of storage and cannot be upgraded unless you use a microSD express card, which costs extra. The Steam Deck OLED, on the other hand, has a custom AMD processor with 4 Zen 2 cores, an integrated RDNA 2 GPU with 8 CUs, and 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM. While I didn't do benchmarks for this video, Digital Foundry did, and the verdict on this was that the Steam Deck OLED chip is flat out not as powerful as the Switch 2's chipset, but it is still capable when it comes to handhelds. But realistically, it cannot compete with the Switch 2's 4K output when docked. Even with upscaling, the Switch 2 beats the Deck with DLSS, which is far superior to FSR and XESS, which are the best options for upscaling for the Steam Deck OLED at the moment. However, the Steam Deck OLED does make up some ground with its 4 extra gigabytes of RAM, along with its 512 gigabytes to 1 terabyte storage options. But that is not enough to take this round, with the Switch 2 winning it due to its newer, more powerful chip, which is capable of DLSS. So the Switch 2 wins this round definitively. Next up, let's talk about features. The Switch 2 is one of the most feature-rich consoles I have played with yet. It has magnetically detachable Joy-Cons, which can be used as individual controllers and also have the ability to be used as mice in mouse mode. The Joy-Cons and the console both have gyro. It has the ability to upscale to 4K automatically when docked, and it even has a port for a camera if you want to use that for whatever reason. I guess some games may make use of it, but still. It also has a 7.9-inch 1080p 120Hz HDR VRR LCD display. However, the display is a bit on the laggier side despite its great specs, which can lead to some blur being apparent. And the display is LCD, which is lackluster in comparison to OLED. This is where the Steam Deck OLED really stands out with its display. The display on the Steam Deck is an 800p 90Hz HDR OLED display. However, it does not have VRR. Despite its smaller size and lower resolution and lower refresh rate, the display still looks amazing due to the contrast ratio and HDR 1000 nits peak brightness, which really makes details pop. The responsiveness is also much better and has no blur at all compared to the Switch 2's display. The Steam Deck OLED also has gyro along with 2 touchpads, which are actually very useful, but that's sort of where the features end for the Steam Deck OLED. So the Switch 2 is much more feature rich overall, which is why it wins this round. However, I can see some people arguing that the Switch 2's features are unnecessary gimmicks and deciding that the Steam Deck OLED features have more utility. So no wrong subjective answer here, but objectively, the Switch 2 is a much more feature-rich handheld, and that's why it takes this round. Oh, and the fact that it has a built-in kickstand is a huge plus here too. Next up, let's compare the software or operating systems of both devices. The Switch 2 runs its own custom user interface. It's very simple, very easy to use, and has great sound effects that will definitely spike your dopamine. It's easy to access your games library and eShop. It's also super easy to hop back into a game where you left off. It is, however, a bit boring. There's only black or white options for themes, at least at the time of recording, that is, and no background music that I really do miss from Nintendo's older consoles, but it's solid for doing what it's intended for. The if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality from the transition with the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 isn't the worst thing. There are plenty of other things for Nintendo's developers to spend their time and resources on. The Steam Deck OLED, on the other hand, runs SteamOS, of course. SteamOS is also very console-like in the way that you can also view your games library with ease and access all the necessary features you need conveniently. However, it's a bit more cluttered, admittedly. Luckily, SteamOS allows for customization. Because the Steam Deck is much more open to modifications, you can install Decky, which allows you to change everything about the UI, including theme music, sound effects, opening animation, and much more. There's also a dedicated desktop mode, which would be a nightmare for Nintendo if that were to be available on the Switch 2, because this allows you to mod your device if you wish and access emulation and downloads from third-party sites.
You're teasing me, naughty.
So the Switch 2 software is great in its own right, but it doesn't hold a candle to SteamOS, which is a much more powerful, customizable operating system. So the Steam Deck OLED takes this round. Now, let's compare the games libraries of both devices. The Switch 2 is still new, so the dedicated library for it is a bit small at this point. But we know with Nintendo that over its lifespan, the Switch 2's library will grow to be a great collection. But as of right now, there are only a few games to choose from that are optimized for the device. But it plays the entirety of the Switch 1 library, with some games even receiving paid upgrades and some free upgrades as well. Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom receive paid upgrades that make them look spectacular on the Switch 2, while games like Mario Odyssey and some other titles receive free upgrades that also look great. However, upgrades for the Switch 2 come at the discretion of the developers, so don't count on automatic upgrades outside of games that run with dynamic resolution and frame rates. So yes, the library for the Switch 2 is deep in a sense with it being backwards compatible, but it is still limited in many regards. The Steam Deck, on the other hand, plays almost every game you can buy on Steam with some caveats. The Steam Deck is running Linux, and some games are just not compatible with Linux. The biggest of those being newer Call of Duty games. This is because Ricochet Anti-Cheat is not compatible with Linux. There are other games that are also incompatible as well. However, Steam has one of, if not the largest game libraries of any online game shop. I mean, you can't run Black Ops 2 on a Switch 2, but you can on a Steam Deck OLED, for example, and a lot of games from that era for that matter. Also, speaking of Black Ops, custom COD Zombies maps also run on the Steam Deck OLED. Sorry, I had to add that because I'm a big Zombies fan, so please hit me up in the comments if you also are. But my main point here really is the Steam Deck has less limitations when it comes to its library. It may not have Nintendo's latest and greatest exclusives, but if you are feeling up to it, you can emulate Switch 1 games on the Steam Deck OLED. But that is all I will say. Because I'd rather not hear a knock at my door from a lawyer, and I'd also prefer to leave this video up and live in peace knowing that I don't have Nintendo's ninjas hunting me down. That's why the Steam Deck OLED takes this round, not because it has better exclusives, but because it has a much deeper variety of games to buy for it, spanning multiple console generations even. Finally, let's talk about value. The Steam Deck OLED starts at $549 USD, and the Switch 2 starts at $449 USD. At least for now, that is the case. For that $449, the Switch 2 comes with a 4K capable dock, 2 Joy-Cons which can be used as both a mouse and 2 individual controllers, along with a grip that allows them to be conjoined into a controller. On the other hand, there's the Steam Deck OLED, which comes with a hard shell case and twice the amount of storage. So not as adventurous, but it makes up ground with the Steam Store and access to other online game shops that the Switch 2 just doesn't have access to, where you can get games for free, like on Epic Game Store. The Steam Deck also does not require you to pay for an online subscription service to use it online, unlike with the Switch 2. But the Switch 2 also makes up some ground here with its ability to be docked with much more performance in games. You can buy a dock for the Steam Deck, but it will not be able to run games at 4K like the Switch 2 can. So, in my opinion, when it comes to value, they both have pros and cons, but overall, it really comes down to the trade-offs that you value versus the other here. So, realistically, I think it's a tie. Yes, the Steam Deck OLED is more expensive up front, but the lower price of the Switch 2 comes with the caveat that you will be paying for online for the life of the device as well. So ultimately, it comes down to how you want to spend your money. While the Steam Deck OLED won more rounds than the Switch 2, it ultimately comes down to how much you weigh each of the categories we discussed here today and your background in gaming. Where is the majority of your existing games library? What games are you wanting to play on your handheld? Nintendo exclusives or a wider variety of games? Do you value portable or docked mode more? Do you want to pay more upfront or rather pay for online services for years to come? But if we were to weigh each of these points based on their impact to overall experience, I personally feel as though they tied because the Switch 2 being able to run games at 4K on a TV is something the Steam Deck OLED cannot compete with at all. So the final verdict really is that the Switch 2 is a better home console, but the Steam Deck OLED is a better portable. But as for me, I prefer the Steam Deck OLED as a portable because I own a lot of Steam games, but the Switch 2 is damn near close. So if you found this video informative, leave a like and subscribe for more handheld reviews and tech related videos. Also, you might as well hit that little bell to be the first to know when my next video comes out. This has been Killer Cam. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Peace.